Taiwan is a reliable and trustworthy cooperative partner of the United States. We will continue to work with the U.S. Congress as well as administration to strengthen cooperation in areas such as Indo-Pacific, security, economic development, talent, cultivation and supply chain, so as to further elevate Taiwan-US relations. I welcome Speaker Pelosi and delegation to Taiwan. Thank you for taking concrete actions to show your staunch support for Taiwan at this critical moment and for expressing the U.S.'s consistent policy supporting Taiwan's self-defense.
Taiwan has been an island of resilience in the world. Indeed, the people of Taiwan have proven to the world that with hope, courage, and determination, it is possible to build a peaceful and prosperous future, even in terms of the challenges you face. And now, more than ever, America's solidarity with Taiwan is crucial, and that is the message we are bringing here today. Today, the world faces a choice between democracy and autocracy. America's determination to preserve democracy here in Taiwan and around the world remains ironclad.
Nancy Pelosi also met with human rights activists in a closed-door meeting. Since Pelosi's potential pit stop in Taiwan was first reported, Beijing has signaled its anger about a top U.S. politician visiting the island nation. While in Cambodia for the ASEAN summit, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said anybody who offends China will be punished.
This
is an out-and-out farce. The United States is violating China's sovereignty under the guise of so-called democracy. Those who play with fire will not come to a good end, and those who offend China will be punished.
27 Chinese warplanes flew into Taiwan's air defense zone after Nancy Pelosi's visit. China also announced a series of live-fire military drills in the air and sea around the island. Taiwan has condemned the military exercises.
China's announcement on its drills in 6 areas around Taiwan, including the southwest, east and southeast, between August 4 to August 7, are equal to sea and air blockades. Such an act covers our country's territory and sea territory. It has severely infringed our country's territorial sovereignty and violated the regulations related with the United Nations Maritime Conventions. Our country is severely condemning such acts.
Meanwhile, the United States and Indonesian militaries have started their annual joint combat exercises on the island of Sumatra. Other partner nations joined for the first time, signaling stronger ties amid growing maritime activity by China in the Indo-Pacific region. More than 5,000 soldiers from the US, Indonesia, Australia, Japan and Singapore are participating in this year's exercises, making them the largest since the drills started in 2009. And with me on the broadcast this minute is our correspondent Susan Teherani from New York, senior journalist Kat Thomas from Liverpool, and Atul Aneja, who is the editor of India Narrative, joining me from New Delhi. Atul, let me begin by asking you for your assessment of Beijing's moves so far. How far would you say Beijing is willing to go to show its anger over Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan?
Frankly, Molly, I think Beijing is going to show and assert itself quite substantially after what has happened for several reasons. One is that we're going to have the China's Communist Party of China's 20th Party Congress. And that's a once in 5-year event. And Xi Jinping is going to be elected there for another 5 years. And I think it's crucial that at this juncture, when there are factions within the Communist Party of China, that he does not internally look weak. And Taiwan, in fact, may be an opportunity for him to further show muscle flexing, to show resolve, because Taiwan is one issue which binds all the factions within the party. So I think it will be a show of strength from the Chinese side for sure. Now the question is to what extent. Right now itself, it's pretty alarming as far as I can see, because what the Chinese are doing, even while Nancy Pelosi was in Taiwan, was essentially do an exercise to blockade Taiwan. And that is a very, in a way, if suppose this blockade lasts, we don't know how long it is going to last. And then the ball is in the other person's court, that is the US court. Because would you allow the blockade of Taiwan to go on, or would you take precipitous action? So probably the Chinese are not testing even US resolve. But definitely, I think we have to take the Chinese very seriously when it question of Taiwan, because for China, Taiwan is central to its one China policy, which includes, of course, Tibet and Xinjiang as well. And that is something which is non-negotiable. And given the specific political circumstances right now in Beijing till October, I doubt whether the Chinese are going to relent in their muscle flexing, if not more. There could be an opinion being generated inside China now that enough is enough, and at some point there should be a military takeover of Taiwan. That debate is definitely on the radar. Now, whether that's implemented or not is not sure. But I do see Nancy Pelosi's visit as a point of inflection, where certainly these ideas, which were partly theoretical earlier or academic, are now really part of the toolkit or of the specific policy options, which Beijing, in the current circumstances, I think is bound to deliberate in far more seriousness than before.
Right. Let me get in Susan Teherani, who has been tracking the reactions coming in from the United States. She's with me from New York. Susan, if you could just piece together for us the statements that have been doing the rounds from the United States before Nancy Pelosi arrived in Taiwan and now, given that China's statements have intensified, there's been more rhetoric coming in from Beijing, and many have also questioned these mixed signals that have been coming in from Washington over this visit by Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting dynamic, Molly, considering the fact that, Nancy Pelosi's itinerary somewhat played out in real time in public, and that kind of spat between the President of the United States and the House Speaker was something that we also saw play out in public. President Biden stopped short of saying he himself did not believe Nancy Pelosi should travel to Taiwan. He said that it was the military and the Pentagon's assessment that she shouldn't. Ultimately, they did say that it was Nancy Pelosi who would be able to decide, leaving that open in case, Nancy Pelosi did go, which she did end up going, so it wouldn't seem like there was a rift within the administration. But, once she did arrive in Taiwan, we saw that it was really silence coming from President Biden himself, despite the fact that his administration somewhat voiced support and said that, this is very ordinary what Nancy Pelosi did. China should not make this a big deal. But where she did get a lot of support was across the aisle from her Republican counterparts and colleagues that really praised her. And she did somewhat get bipartisan support from members within her own party, not the progressives like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But I think all in all, once she landed in Taiwan, it was clear that the United States understood that this was the right thing to do, and that Beijing's actions are just out of line. They're very aggressive. And ultimately, I think what it did show is that whether or not the United States has to rethink and reevaluate on how it's been accommodating to China when it comes to Taiwan.
And with that, tensions soaring between Washington and Beijing. Kat Thomas, if I can just ask you to comment on what you would say has Nancy Pelosi achieved through this visit. A lot of questions over whether it was worth it after all.
I think that in the press conference and in the meetings that she had with Tsai Ing-wen, she made it very clear that in her opinion she had come to stand up for the democratic rights of the 23 million people in Taiwan, and that this was a non-negotiable line for the US. that they would stand by the rights of the Taiwanese people. So I think she has made it very clear that she won't be harassed personally by Beijing's threats, and that if she chooses, in her position as Speaker of the House, to visit Taiwan, that is what she will do, and it is very much her right to do so, and that they are holding their line. Also in that same press conference, Tsai Ing-wen, the president of Taiwan, was saying Taiwan is holding the line for democracy in the region. So this was very much, both parties were talking very strongly about democracy. And actually, initially, they didn't even mention China. So.
Right. Speaking of which, Afal, what do you make of Washington's stance on this visit by Nancy Pelosi all throughout? We've been talking about the mixed signals, also how the U.S. president himself had earlier said that this was not a good idea. He was earlier also made to roll back his comments on Taiwan as many as 3 times in the last 1 year. These confusing messages have, many would argue, been seen as a weakness by Beijing or the lack of a clear policy on part of the U.S. when it comes to the Indo-Pacific.
I think Biden was right in his first instinct that it is a huge mistake to actually go and to Taiwan. And I'll tell you why. The first thing that has happened is, and I'm coming from Moscow just last week, and in Moscow what I heard was that Chinese were trying to play ball both with Ukraine and with Russia. And the Russians weren't particularly happy with the Chinese stance on Ukraine. But now, with China also getting boxed in, I think it will bring the Russians and the Chinese together much closer than before. I think that will have much bigger strategic implications, which do not necessarily suit American interests. So that's number one. And number two is that now take your eyes off the ball naturally, because as the situation focuses more on China, you've seen the blockade already implementing. It's an indirect signal to Russians that you can go ahead and do what you want in Ukraine. And third thing is, if the blockade continues, then Taiwan is a big powerhouse of high technology, of internet chips, which go into everything from automobiles to it's the thing to drive the new economy. And if that happens and supply chains are further hit, then we already have a situation of economic crisis caused by the Ukraine on oil and on food, and we're going to have another element coming into it. I think it's terrible for the world economy. So if you take it in totality, in my view, it was a disastrous move. It may bolster Biden's falling numbers in the U.S. because that we know. Both the things, what is her visit to China, as well as tangentially what happened in Kabul, the killing of Emine al-Zawahiri. It will together bolster Biden's numbers, I think. But I think in the long run, or even in the middle term, I think it's going to boomerang big time.
Right. A request you all to stay on with me. Just a quick update for the benefit of our viewers. Now, China is not just an economic powerhouse. It also has a massive military. Its defense spending is second only to the U.S. And over the years, it has massively enhanced its capabilities, whether it's missile technologies or naval power. In case China decided to quote-unquote reunify Taiwan, then Taipei's armed forces are no comparison to Beijing's might. Let's now have a look at how the militaries compare. First, a look at the defense budget. China has a defense budget of $230 billion, while Taiwan has a defense budget of $168 million. Active personnel in China standing at 2 million. For Taiwan, the number stands at 170,000. China's reserve personnel, 510,000. Taiwan's 1,500,000. Let's take a look at the tank strength now. For China, it stands at 5,250. For Taiwan, it stands at just over 1,000. China has 35,000 armored vehicles and Taiwan has close to 3,500. Coming to fighter aircraft now, China has 1,200. Taiwan has 288. Attack helicopters, China has 281, while Taiwan has 91. China has a fleet strength of 777 and the number for Taiwan stands at 117. China has at least 79 submarines. Taiwan has 4. Lastly, the destroyers. China has 41 of them. Taiwan has 4. And going back across to our experts and our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who has been getting us those updates and perspectives. I want to come to you, Kat Thomas, on that. Let's just also talk about the reactions that have been coming in from across the world. This, of course, has been a visit that has been closely monitored also by Russia for its own reasons. It has also backed this visit. It has also, in fact, reacted. Russia is backing Beijing when it comes to the Nancy Pelosi Taiwan visit. What would you say this visit would hold when it comes to the implications on geopolitics? Would we also see Russia and China coming together even closer when it comes to issues like Ukraine?
I would say that Moscow coming out and publicly backing Beijing's position has not been a real surprise in this situation. They do very much have each other's backs when it comes to this kind of topic, for example. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily going to lead to changing the situation in between China and Ukraine, for example. I would say that was perhaps putting a little bit too much weight on this visit, which, after all, it wasn't a visit by Joe Biden. It wasn't an escalation of tensions, except in the opinion of Beijing. And obviously, their reaction has been very strong, and it's perhaps a little bit unfortunate. But if you look at the situation in Taipei, for example, today, the population in Taiwan seemed pretty satisfied with the visit. Everyone seemed fairly relaxed about it. They recognize that there will be some pushback from Beijing in terms of this live fire military drills. There have been some sanctions announced, but in Taiwan, we're very used to this kind of action and these kind of strong words and statements coming from Beijing. And perhaps it has taken, if you look at the international reaction, where some people were getting very concerned that, World War III were to break out or be a missile crisis. Whereas if you look at the people who are regularly undergoing this kind of pressure from Beijing, this hasn't really been anything out of the ordinary. It's, of course, we will have to see what pans out over the next few days. And Beijing has certainly, the PLA has certainly, sent in those aircraft today, which is, it's stronger than it has done previously. The live drills, insisting on Taiwan, and this is why Taiwan has taken great pains, the military has taken great pains to point out that Beijing, or the PLA, in this instance, they believe that they are violating conventions and that they shouldn't be carrying out these drills. The sanctions is something we're just extremely used to. It's not really, I would say, it's not really being seen as a huge escalation in Taiwan because we are so accustomed to dealing with Beijing all the time. And perhaps it has been a surprise for other people who are perhaps not so used to paying attention to this topic, have found these words to be very, very strong and intimidating.